this is my in-class exercise. So this came out of the basic gist of this came out of a um, course I was teaching that was 3 hours long, and I was an evening class, like 6 to 9 o'clock at night. And after we talked about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Um, I handed them a picture of the charts that had been in the book, the like the the overviews, without labels, and I asked them to figure out what the labels were, and they looked at me like I was from the moon, and I said, "No, really, you know this already. Most of this, you can figure this out." "Oh, no, 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 we have to look this up." "No, you don't." And then we spent the next, I don't know how long, figuring it out. And afterwards, they knew it. They knew photosynthesis and cellular respiration. They may not have been able to explain it, but they could draw it. It was really fascinating. And so ever since then, I've kind of done this a little bit like that. Um, so let's go see if what we already know about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Um, you already know a lot of this, right? If you're trying to, like, figure out what goes where, um, they figure out pretty quickly that this one's sunlight. Um, and then they figure out that chloroplasts do photosynthesis, right? And cellular respiration happens in mitochondria. Um, ATP, yeah, well, that's that little explosion thing that does powers most of the work. And then heat energy gets lost. So really now comes the chemistry. Where's the chemistry come in? Well, where are mitochondria at work? Well, in you. So what is it that, either what do you breathe in or what do you breathe out? And they know one or the other, right? Either we're breathing in the oxygen or they're breathing out the CO2. And we've just filled in this thing, and they knew all of this. Um, then I'm going to talk about oxidation reduction. And so I talk about the fact that oxygen um, is a big bully, and that oxygen will always try to pull electrons towards it. So, oxygen tends to pull in the direction of um, being reduced because it oxidizes the other thing. And since they're always coupled with each other, this is how they go together. Um, and here it's the same thing, except it's the other way around. So this runs this way around because this is how the oxygen bit works. Um, and and then we come to this one, and then we're going to ask them to label this one. Um, and it turns out it's not actually as hard as it looks, right? Because we know there's light, right? We know these stacks are the thylakoids. We know this big thing is the chloroplast. That's got to be somewhere. Um, CO2, where's CO2? Well, this one looks a little bit like water, right? So that's water. Now, we looked at this overall reaction, right? The inputs, what are the inputs of photosynthesis? Well, we said that CO2 was one of the inputs of what is sort of photosynthesis. And look, lo and behold, the CO2 got a carbon in it. And that carbon gets preserved in this cycle where it's being shuttled into the sugar. This cycle is called the Calvin cycle. This thing requires light. Um, And what else we got? Oh, yeah. So ATP, that was that little explosion looking thing, right? And then ADP is the uncharged little thing that lugs around a little phosphate. This here is plants produce oxygen. Um, and then the last but not least, we've got this NADPH and this NAD plus. The difference between those two is that this one here has a few extra protons, right? A couple of extra H's. And protons and electrons, they kind of go together with each other. So the one with the extra electrons, that's this guy, and the one without, that's this guy. And voila, we have just labeled these little things. And then we're going to do the same thing here. Label them, talk through it. And then we go to this label, talk through it. And really talk about how the buildup happens of this proton gradient and how it escapes, like, a waterfall, like a turbine, like a actually turns out around there. And then lo and behold, this was the chloroplast. And lo and behold, this looks like the same kind of thing in the mitochondrium. And so let's look back at these equations, because in both cases, there's ATP being produced, right? In cellular respiration, it's the end result. It's what actually drives the processes. But in plants, in addition to driving the processes from the mitochondria that plants have, it also drives it. This is the same thing, right? It's the same thing that's happening in the thylakoids, is the same thing that's happening in the mitochondria. And it produces the same thing. It produces ATP. In the case of plants, the chloroplasts then use this ATP to drive the short-term molecule ATP, to have this utilized to take CO2 and putting it into long-term sugar storage. And that's where the energy of plants is basically the energy of light is stored in. So this light energy gets turned into a proton gradient. The proton gradient gets turned into a usable energy, ATP, which is a short term, very quick. So light is even quicker, right? Light is super quick. That gets stored in something that's holds on a little chemical energy, that holds on a little longer, and then into a type of energy that you can literally stick in a shelf. And it turns out that this ATP step, this conversion of one type of energy, the light energy, into a chemical intermediate energy, into a currency, ATP is the same thing that's happening in mitochondria.